Hey good folks, my name is Leif and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel, Devs and Dice. This show is called Boxes of Shame, where I paint up a miniature for Dungeons and Dragons. Now this week's miniature marks the beginning of a 5-part series where I'm gonna paint something that has been often requested and asked for. I am gonna be painting the Wizkids Young Dragons. And I'm gonna be honest, I was a little bit afraid to paint up these Wizkids Young Dragons. I felt that I wasn't ready. Thankfully, the great people at Army Painter heard about my situation and they decided to send me a box of, well, lots of things to help me complete my 5 chromatic dragons. So large thank you goes out to them. And with that, it was as if the Viking woke in me. I do not fear any dragons. My fate has already been decided. What can a stupid lizard do? In all seriousness, I did feel empowered. I felt good. So let's have a look at how I painted up the first of 5 chromatic dragons from Wizkids. And I think from a painting perspective, this one might have been the trickiest one, the Young White Dragon.
A couple of years ago I started getting into D&D. As my passion for D&D grew, so did my collection of minis, and like many others out there, I now have boxes of shame. This is me painting every single one of my miniatures.
Alright, this is the Young White Dragon from Wizkids and their Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures line. Now, white dragons live in frigid climates, favoring Arctic areas or icy mountain tundras. White dragons are white colored, but they also have loads of sort of different subtle colors in their skin, and I'm going to try to catch that in order to make it feel alive. First thing I need to do was to clean off most of the obvious mold lines, which was easily done with my hobby knife. Now I wanted to remove a transparent holder to make it a bit simpler to paint the base going forwards. Now I attached a decorative base to the black base. I just used some super glue. In this case, the decorative base was a bit warped and I wanted to hurry up the drying of the super glue, so I used some activator to kick it into gear. Now I had to construct my own mini holder for this dragon. I used an old vitamin bottle which I skewered with a wooden dowel and then I just hot glued it into place. Now for the base coat, I started with Army Painter's Ice Storm, a cold blue with some grey to it. I thinned out this paint using Army Painter's Airbrush Medium, which is sort of a thinner and a flow improver all in one bottle. As you see, I'm going on with thin coats. This way, I will not lose any of that nice detail that's in the sculpt. I build up the color layer by layer until I'm happy with the result. Now, the way I'm going to paint this white dragon will be towards more of a sort of ice-cold dragon, which will mean that I will be working mostly with greys, whites, and blues. And on that note, the next color in line is Army Painter's Crystal Blue, a slightly more saturated blue color. I'm hitting each major fold or crease that I can see on the dragon to define some sort of a shadow. This is actually the first time I am using my airbrush for these sort of details, and I have to say, I think it worked kind of really well. I didn't have to dial down my PSI on the compressor, but more, I had to alternate between shooting out paint and air like every second.
Home to what, Captain? Home to a burned out radioactive planet that is incapable of supporting human
Looking
life.
nice. Now the next color I'm coming in with is Centaur Skin from Army Painter, a sort of pinkish skin tone. I'm working this at the bottom of the wings and the membranes, specifically just to get a nice gradient going on. The inspiration for this comes from seeing the sky in sort of early mornings in Sweden during the winter. As I was doing this, I also decided to hit the, sail it had on the back of the head, and then of course the underside of the wings. Now to punch that color home, I'm coming in with some Warlock Purple from Army Painter, a warmer pink-purple color. This I am applying to wherever I added the centaur skin, but only at the edges of it to create some depth. Looks super nice to me at this point, which is why the next step was somewhat scary. Once all of the paint had dried, I came in with some Spaceship Exterior from Army Painter, a cold bluish grey color. Now the plan was to establish all of the highlights on the dragon using the dry brush technique. I started light at first, but was increasingly aggressive with the dry brushing, creating almost an overbrush. Finally, when I was happy with the result, last dreaded step, it was time to go back to the airbrush booth. Now I added some matte white to the pot and I diluted this using the airbrush medium to glaze a thin white layer on top of the paint scheme. Now the reason why I diluted this so much was simply to give me as much wiggle room as possible to constantly be able to gauge if I had enough white covering the dragon. The previous skin tones needed to shine through, but not take the attention, just sort of create a cohesive paint job. Now I missed to film this, but at the very end when I was somewhat happy, I added some Liquitex iridescent medium to the pot to get some nice sparkles. Now I do not recommend this. I almost killed my airbrush and thankfully I had a sonic cleaner and running it in that a couple of cycles sorted it out, but it was really struggling. You can't argue with the results though. I really like those faint frosty sparkles that indicate sort of freezing temperatures this monster resides in. Now I am coming in with some blue tone from Army Painter. The idea is to darken the area around the eyes. I do this so that I can create some contrast in the blue glowing eyes later. While that is drying, I come in with some matte black which I diluted with some airbrush medium. This thing is going to get busy in the coming weeks. I started laying in black onto all of the claws the dragon had on its wings and legs. Now to start on the mouth, I chose a saturated warm red in Vampire Red to create some contrast against the cold skin. Once that was done, I added some matte white to my wet palette and started to pencil in the center of the eyes. Now time for one of my favorite paints, Skeleton Bone from Army Painter. I used it for the teeth of a dragon. Here's a place where I thought that the sculpt was lacking a little bit. The sort of scarce teeth just made it look a little bit goofy in my mind. While the teeth were drying, I came in with some Viking blue. This I diluted to a glaze consistency with some water and airbrush medium. Then I carefully started laying it in on the eyes of a dragon. Now once this dries, it will give the illusion of blue, glowing eyes. Back on the teeth, I chose some strong tone to grime and dirty them up. Once that had dried, I came back in with some skeleton bone for some highlights. I think I actually mixed in some matte white to create an additional highlight at the very tips of the teeth. Okay, at this point I was pretty much done with the dragon and I focused on the base. I wasn't a fan of this and I wanted a more dramatic landscape. Now I started with some battlefield rocks from Army Painter. This was a basing material which looked like torn natural cork, which made it very nice and natural looking. I started adding some of these rocks on top of the base using some super glue. Now I wanted a harsh landscape where sharp outcroppings could easily injure the careless ones. So I started to add these rocks, and then some more, and well, finally I had something that looked pretty dramatic. I used some superglue activator from Army Painter to just expedite that drying process. And I have to say, I think this looks kinda gnarly already here. Now I wanted some additional scale in the landscape, so I used some basing glue and some brown battleground to get some well-needed small scale variation. I used a crappy old hobby brush to sort of spread all of the glue all over the base, and then I simply sprinkled on some of that brown battleground. Once the glue was dry, it was time to prime the base. I went of course with matte white from Army Painter. Now I love these moments when a primer sort of has hit the base and you can start to see the end result. Now I needed a light blue wash. For this I used some water, a few drops of the airbrush medium, and a mix of Royal Cloak, Toxic Mist and Void Shield Blue. Here I thought that the wash was a bit thin, so I added a little bit more paint. That was more like it. Now I just took a large dry brush and coated the entire base, I mean every nook and cranny. You can see that the properties are quite nice of this homemade wash. And here is the result after it dried. Looks awesome, but I wanted to reintroduce some of the highlights, so I came back in with some matte white and dry brushed it lightly over the frozen landscape. Now this is my first time doing any sort of winter or Arctic basing, and I have to say I love it. Once the dry brushing was done, it was time to reattach the transparent holder. This was easily done by just using some super glue. Alright, now I wanted an Arctic tundra landscape, but I also wanted some contrast, and for that I used some winter tufts and frozen tufts from Army Painter. I dotted out some super glue over the landscape and placed the tufts where I felt it would make sense using some tweezers. I also tend to push in the tufts really with the tweezers to ensure that no seams are seen. And as usual, I had an uneven amount of these two kinds of tufts to make it seem more natural. Time for some finishing touches, and for that I'm going to use some battlefield snow. Now I did some tests before starting this, and the mixture I found that worked best was to add some basin glue to a container, add some snowflock, and then a dash of that iridescent medium from Liquitex. I just used that same old poor hobby brush and mixed this together to create sort of a nice sort of paste. I started adding the snow paste where I thought it would make sense, meaning where I think snow might have piled up. As a side note, I also put some of this paste on the tufts to bind them together with the environment and make them look frosty. Once I had the snow paste where I wanted it, I took some additional snowflock and just sprinkled it on. Let's have a look at how it all turned out, shall we? Alright folks, that's it. What did you think about the result? Do you have any questions or other comments? Please feel free to post your comment down in the comment section down below. As always, if you like what I'm doing here, then please take a moment to smash that like button, make sure that that subscribe button is grey, and share this with anyone you think would find this entertaining. Now for you wonderful folk who have watched this far, here comes yet another delicacy from the Swedish proverbs. Det som göms I snö kommer upp I tö. This is probably among the more serious ones of the Swedish proverb so far. It literally means what's hidden in snow will resurface when it thaws. Now you probably get the gist of this, but it sort of means that sooner or later the truth will, emerge. So be good, kind folks, otherwise you will upset the Viking. Alright, good folks, with that I want to thank you for watching. I hope you have a fantastically awesome day. Stay safe out there. Until next time.